and just was really struck this morning more than perhaps any time of just what an incredibly diverse community of people are gathering. And I hope you can look around and appreciate that this is not what we think. We often think I'm going to a church service. I hope today you'll have a sense of, you know what? We can call it what we want, but we're coming to meet with Jesus. We're coming to hear what he has to speak into our lives, to engage his presence and his provision for life. Even if you're just exploring that, I hope that is what you're coming to explore, because he has so much to say. As we've noted this fall season, we've been continuing in an extended encounter with Jesus through the Gospel of Luke. And particularly in the fall season where things start to get a little more brisk, eventually they will, and we start to feel that kind of freshness, and it sharpens our experience of life a little bit. That's what Jesus is bringing as we continue in this encounter, that he, in this living testimony through the Gospel of Luke, this living account of his life, not who was, but who also is. It is a living account, and we're engaging him speaking of the big matters of life. And what we found in the recent weeks is he's coming to this point in which Jesus was heading towards Jerusalem. So he's heading towards the ultimate encounter, the ultimate showdown, if you will. And he wants to begin to help his disciples to really hear what matters and to find themselves deeply rooted in God and to stay rooted in God. And so he begins to speak to them, as we've seen over the last few weeks, of big questions that he challenges us. Questions of hypocrisy. He says, don't give yourself to hypocrisy. Now, we love to just say, oh, that's about really lame people who are not as good as they think. But hypocrisy meant being actors. It just means those who act and perform for others. And he's saying, don't do that, because that's not rooting in who you really are. If you live your whole life out to just acting and performing for others, you will completely miss the reality of who you are. And then he says, and watch out for greed. But he defines greed. He says, greed is that which means that we consist merely in what we have and what we accumulate. He says, do not let yourself become defined merely by material possessions, as if that's the fullness of your existence. Can you hear his heart? He's trying to say to you, stay rooted in who you really are. And he continues with that as we listen to him, and we pick up in this 12th chapter. And I invite us to follow. It's a little bit of a long text, but I think you'll agree that the heart of Jesus here is best heard in the fullness of what he has to say. So I invite you to follow with me as he continues speaking into the life of his followers then and now. We pick up in verse 32, where he launches in, continually depressing into our hearts, and says, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed, he continues, and ready for service, and keep your lamps burning, like men waiting for their master return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. I tell you the truth, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them, the master to the servant. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the second or third watch of the night. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Peter asked, are you telling this parable to us or to everyone? The Lord answered, who then is the faithful servant and wise manager whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? Well, it will be good for that servant whom the master finds doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, well, my master's taking a long time in coming, and then he begins to beat the men servants and maid servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and in an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. That servant who knows his master's will and does not get ready or does not do what his master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. And with those words, the room grew quiet. They're strong words. We can hear something of Jesus' heart and the heart of warning us. And I know that we hear those, that in his parable he uses this very striking language that's harsh, and we do well to remember that he is telling a story and using that harshness, but not miss the warning. There is something at the heart of this. And I think it helps for us to grasp the fact that as Jesus is heading towards Jerusalem, there's something way more at hand in all that he's come to bring to bear than what most understood. And that is part of what he's pressing in on. Many people understood him as a great religious figure, somebody new, and many have clearly understood that he's unlike anyone else. The way he speaks, what he does, the power by which he heals, he seems like one who's come from God, no doubt. But still, many people might say, well, he's come from God to kind of fix our political system temporarily, or to overthrow Rome, or, today we might say that he's a religious figure who's come to bring us, some inner peace, to make us morally slightly better people. Jesus understands that then and now we do not understand the mass of what he's coming to bring. He made it very clear. He's coming to change everything. All of our existence has been separated from its source. The whole world is disordered. Nothing is as it should be. And he's coming to bring the kingdom of God. That's why he introduces right there at the beginning of these words, he says, don't be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you what? To give you the kingdom, the rule and reign of God breaking into this world. He's not simply here for you and I to become slightly tweaked, to do a little bit of renovation in the home of our souls. He's coming because he's created an entire new breaking through. The powers that separate are going to be defeated as he's head towards Jerusalem, where he will be killed, but he will rise again. He will defeat the powers of this world, and everything will break into the beginning of a restoration of all things. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says these words as he's describing this. He says, Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things. That is what he is speaking about, that is to come and that is now breaking through. He says, everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. And the word that he speaks there, it's this word that he pulls from Greek philosophy that means the regenesis, the remaking of all things, restoring everything to its original and rightful state. He's bringing nothing less. It's nothing like what you and I have understood. It's almost beyond our imaginations. It's everything we've longed for and about 100 times more. Everything that seems wrong will be made right. This is what he's getting at. This is what is breaking in. And it's going to be way more climatic but it is the ultimate future that we're to live into. In J.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, that some of you may be very familiar with. At the end, the real hero of the story, Sam, he says at one point, he says, I thought you were dead. I thought I was dead. Is it true that everything that is sad is going to come untrue? Those are the words Tolkien chose because those are the words that we could say to Jesus. I thought you were dead. I thought I was dead. Now he's resurrected and changing the whole storyline. Is it true? Everything sad is going to become untrue. What a beautiful statement. And Jesus' answer, yes. Everything you know that feels wrong, everything that says it's not the way it should be, there's this injustices, there's pain, there's suffering, there's loss, there's separation, all of that, He is going to bring restoration to. This is what Jesus wants us to grasp. This is what He's bringing down. And this is why we speak of the kingdom sometimes in saying it's an upside down kingdom, or it sets everything right side up, if you will. That everything that was last will be first, and things that are first will be made last. That sociologically will change it. It will set things right in that way, because it will reorder things the way they were meant to be against all the injustices that we know. It will set those things right. We also sometimes call it, and could call it, the inside-out kingdom, because every way that you and I search to try to find ourselves, our dignity, our respect, our value, our worth, every way that you and I do it is trying to find it outside. We spend our whole lives trying to run, trying to find a role that will affirm us, people who will affirm us. Everything is outside. But in the kingdom, it will come from the inside. Well done, good and faithful servant, the creator of the universe, your very source, affirming your value. You will never have to try to prove it to anyone. That's the outside-in kingdom. But here we see that Jesus might also say that the kingdom is forward back, meaning that the future now takes over the present. The forward comes into the now, and that everything that is to come has already broken in, and we're to live into that. We're to live as if the kingdom has come, as people who are prepared for it, ready for it. This is part of what he's trying to get at. What is the challenge that comes to that when you try to say, wow, now I see my destiny. Now I see what the Father has given me. How do I live into it? Well, he knows that one of the challenges will be our relationship to time. Because the truth is, the longer something takes till it fully comes, we have more difficulties keeping hold of it, right? The challenge is all summed up in this word, and it's a word we don't like or do well with. Waiting. Waiting. Anybody here really love to wait? We're not really great waiters, you know. I mean, the longer you wait for something, the more you get lulled into the present. If something was coming and it's really quick and it's coming tomorrow, you do pretty well to go, wow, I'm really into that. But if it's going to come a long time from now, you kind of get lulled in that it's never happening, because any time becomes not really any time, no real time. If I told you that your entire career, everything you do is going to change, you're going to have a whole new venture, a whole new career, calling, vocation in life, and it begins tomorrow. You'd be going, oh my God, you'd be so focused on it. Like you'd be thinking about, forget the past, you'd be thinking about what's coming tomorrow. If I told you, you're leaving this country and you're moving to an entirely foreign land tomorrow, you would be thinking what? About what? That land. You'd be like going, wow, what's that going to be like? How do I prepare for it? That's exactly what Jesus is saying. The problem is, if I told you, same thing is true, and in the whole big picture of things, all that really should matter is that future, because it lasts forever, but it's not fully going to be consummated, and you're not going to fully enter into its reality for a while, and it's maybe going to be a long while. What happens? Well, I stay more attached to the way things are, the world that I'm in, and I start really living for it And I really don't choose to enter into the reality that is to come, the defining reality, the one that's already broken in and should define my life. This is what Jesus is speaking into, is this waiting. And he understands that it's the challenge that they face, the challenge that we face. And the truth is that waiting can also have a very powerful, transforming experience. And he wants it to. Any couple who has ever become pregnant and they now know, like, oh my gosh, we're getting ready to have a child come into the world, they are changed. They're so conscious that in a while, my whole role in life is going to change. My responsibility is going to change. I'm going to be a parent. I mean, everything I've kind of had in the past is going to be different now. They become expansive. Something changes. That's why Jesus is saying we are to be people who are like pregnant with the reality of the kingdom, of a whole new way of life, everything being set right. That should be what's defining for us. This is why he speaks of us being born again into a whole new realm. And so from the Bible's point of view, the coming of Jesus in his return is not something where we're trying so much to focus on finding out when it happens, but it's more about how it will find us. Will it find us rooted and ready for the things that are to come? And that is what he's after. So he warns us, and all of his warnings are about, are you rooted and ready for what is ultimately at hand? And so in this text and in these words, he gives us some ideas about how you and I can live and enter the kingdom. Because this is what he's called us to do. Enter it. Enter that reality of it. It will unfold ultimately over time, but enter into that reality now. But how do I do it? Because it's the future trying to shape the present. So he gives some things here that I think we should seek to take hold of. Their practices, if you will. What he's kind of saying to us is that we have a choice to make in terms of kingdoms. If you and I were told that, you know what, a new king has come and taken over. They're now going to rule. And they're great. It's amazing. Like, this is the best thing we could ever hope for. And they're setting up their kingdom now. And you are going to be invited to come enter in and live in this new kingdom. It could be the greatest news of the world. But you're still living on the outside. It hasn't been fully finished and prepared yet. So you can choose to start living by what's that kingdom represents, or you can stay on the outside and go, you know what? I think I just want to make my home out here, as bad as it is. Jesus is saying, in a sense, that's kind of the choice we have. So how do we begin to live that way? Well, the first thing he refers to, we see in verse 33, is he says, provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. And he speaks of give to the poor. Have this radical generosity. The first thing we can say is invest in what is to come. Invest in it through this radical generosity, because he's saying, in essence, everything that you're investing in that only is material in nature, only is temporal in nature, will not last. It's not wrong. He wants us to enjoy creation. He wants us to enjoy many things. He's not saying that there's no value to this world and its pleasures. God created it, but it will not last in its current condition. But everything that you invest into that has eternal value, that will have effects into the way things will exist forever and ever and ever, that is going to last. So give yourself and invest yourself into those things. And we might say, but that's hard because the world as it is right now, I feel afraid, I feel insecure. And so I'm kind of scared about not having enough. And Jesus understands that. He understands that's a natural condition. But he's trying to put our lives in perspective. If you know that God is ultimately going to provide everything, just provision for everyone, forever and ever and ever, you have reason to what? Not be so afraid of the insecurities of this world. That's why he begins his words by saying, do not be afraid. your Father's giving you everything. The reason we are stingy is because what? We're afraid. We're insecure. So we want to hold everything back. He's saying, don't be so afraid. Don't live by that kind of fear that wants to hold on to everything. It's hard, but God's going to provide forever for you. So the first thing to do is invest into that future. Because what? Where your treasure is, what you've given yourself to, is where your heart's going to be. You're going to be invested into that. It will change you. And the truth is, we know it's real because, well, we just know that if I told you, sell everything you had, excuse me, everything you have, get rid of it all, everything, sell it, and invest everything into this other country, where would your heart be? You would not be affected by this country because you pretty much sold out. You'd be affected by what? The country that you invested in. That's where your heart would be because you've given yourself to it. And this is the challenge Jesus is bringing. He's not saying be irresponsible. He's not saying don't care and you don't have a lot to manage. But he's trying to make the point. If you knew that you're going to spend eternity somewhere, invest into it. Give to that because your heart will be living there. And that's what he's after. He wants your heart rooted and ready. So he says invest in that. Give yourself to that. This is what he speaks over and over. Invest in what is to come. Then he goes on, and we noticed he then says, now be dressed and ready for service and keep your lamps burning, like men waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them what? Watching when he comes. Watching, waiting, prepared, focused. The second thing that Jesus seems to bring home to us, he's saying, you and I do well to stay faithfully focused and prepared. Faithfully focused and prepared in what is to come. But he defines the whole scene as one in which one is waiting through the night because their master has been off at a wedding banquet. And in that culture and context, they would understand wedding banquets have an undetermined length to them. In that culture, if one didn't maybe have much, the banquet, trust me, a wedding would still go on at least all day and well into the night and maybe a couple days. And if they were really, really wealthy, a wedding banquet could go on for days and days. You never know when this guy's going to come back. And that's kind of his point. But he also very clearly frames it all in the night. He will come back in the second or third watch of the night, which means, before midnight or between midnight and the morning. He's coming back in the mid of the night. And every illustration by which Jesus describes his return, he always says that it will come in the night. Why is that? Well, because in the nighttime it's what? It's dark. And Jesus sees that between the time he has come and his return, we are always living in an element of darkness. There's always a darkness. We will not be fully awake. The sun has not come. The day has not arrived yet. That is the state we live in. And what happens when you're in darkness? You're more likely to fall asleep. And this is Jesus' point, is that as we live in darkness, we're more able and likely to come into a spiritual sleep where we kind of lose our sense of reality. When you're asleep, you're kind of not in touch with reality. It's called dreams, good or bad dreams, but they're not necessarily the full picture of the way things really are. They get a little distorted. And he's saying, eventually you and I are going to be in the night, and we're vulnerable to losing our sense of this. So he wants them to be people who stay awake, who are clear. So he says, be dressed and ready for service and keep your lamps burning. And what he's speaking about is one who doesn't let themselves kind of just fade off and, just lose a sense of what's at hand. Be one who's girded up, who's dressed themselves. And the real words are literally to gird up, which meant they had the long tunics which ran to the ground, and that's what they would sleep in, like the undergarment. But when you were going to be active, you pulled that up and tucked it into your belt. And that's what they were to do. Otherwise, you really wouldn't be able to move about and be responsive to things. So he's saying, be in that position where you are so responsive, so alert, so ready to go, that you're not in the sleeping mode. You're in the one that tucks in and is ready and dressed. And keep your lamps burning. They had no light switch to come on, so if the master came home, if they were going to realize that I want to stay in the reality that this is all unfolding, it's at hand, and that's what I'm thinking about, that's where my focus is, that's what my preparation is for, you will keep that lamp ready. Which meant, since there's no lights or anything else, it all comes down to that lamp, and you would keep oil for the lamp, you would keep the wick trimmed and ready to use. So when the master came home, you could respond and do as you were meant to do. So he's saying, be in that kind of preparation. Have that kind of focus. Don't let yourself fall asleep and begin to get drawn into the way and the thinking of this world. When you have people who, your work struggles, or if you're trying to find work you can, or you've got a workplace that doesn't seem to extend the dignity that you are deserving of, don't let those things bring you down. Stay awake and sharp to the reality of what God has for you, who you are, and what's ahead. No matter what's going on with your family, stay awake and alert to what God has for you, not the way other people define you. Stay alert to what is to come, not the way things might appear to be. This is what Jesus wanted to keep saying to his disciples. Do not give in to the night. And he kept pressing him in on this. And I know most of us would say, I'm there. I want to take seriously the things of God. Many of us would. But the truth is, if we're really honest, we're much farther from this than we maybe want to admit to ourselves. Because when it comes to our identity and feeling comfort and feeling, hey, I feel good about myself, we probably find more of that by shopping in some catalog for some new clothes than we do for what Jesus said about us. If I could buy that new set of clothes, I don't know, I just feel so good. It's like God's like, really? You think those tell you who you are? You're living really rooted then right in this. Not for the day in which all things will be properly restored. Some of us find more comfort planning for our vacations than we do for heaven. I mean, just honestly. I'm like so excited, I feel so fulfilled that I have a good vacation planned, which is a good thing, by the way, to a point, but why does that seem to bring more fulfillment than the reality that everything's going to be restored and nothing here is ever going to be fully right? This is what Jesus is pressing for them. Why? Because there's going to be a long period of time, and he doesn't want them to lose their sense of rootedness. And so he presses them into this and presses them to understand how vital this is. Because we're a people who, the longer things get, the more we think, well, one day, I'll be faithful. I'm going to do something and get it all together one day in the future. I was the ultimate in cramming for a test. You could tell me there was the most insane exam, but 2 months, come on. The last day, I'm going to just stay up all night and coffee, and we're going to get through this thing. We're going to cram for it. Jesus is saying your faithfulness is not determined by something you're going to do then. It's determined right now. If you're faithful, you will be living with this element of focus that you will keep going. You've got to press into that. It's like when the doctor says to you, hey, you need to get your house in order. You need to get your affairs in order. What he's really saying is you should have a long time ago, but you better start getting real serious about it because everything's going to change and culminate. Where are you in that process? Jesus is pressing that to them and saying, get your house in order. You need to consider that you don't have forever. Begin to ask yourself now, is my life in order along these lines? Press into that place. Stay focused, which means I need to do things that keep my mind focused. I need to engage with people in the scriptures, prayer, to remind myself and know who I am And who I am is what's going to come when all things are restored, and my identity. This world's never going to tell me who I am, no matter how much I run around. No matter who I talk to, it'll never decide who you are. You'll be trying to figure that out forever. Everyone will have a different version of you. You have 10 versions of you, don't you? God has one, and it will be defined in the things to come. So give yourself to that, he says. And lastly, he continues, verse 42, it says, the Lord answered, then you got to love this point. Peter speaks up at this point. This is where Peter, who always speaks out and seems to like a little inopportune, and he's like, hey, is this parable for us or, like for everyone else? You got to appreciate that. And it's almost as if like the teacher who's giving the best presentation they could give, but there's the one student who goes, hey, excuse me, is this going to be on the test? Do I really need to be listening to you? That you almost sense that's what Peter's saying. Does this apply to me, or can I just skip out right now? Jesus doesn't answer him. You'll notice he never really directly answers his question. Why? Well, in the end, he comes around and says, you're really responsible for what you know. So yes, the leaders, the core disciples are going to be ultimately greatly responsible, but he says in the end, everyone, to whatever you've been given, you're going to be responsible. So that's kind of the answer. And he goes on to talk about the servant. And this is where he says, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? Well, and now he describes it, it will be good for that servant whom the master finds doing so when he returns, the one who's living life out, providing for others as they should. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. That's the right way to go. But suppose the servant says to himself, my master is taking a long time in coming. And then he begins to beat the men servants and maidservants, and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he's not aware of. Notice, we can easily miss this, but notice what Jesus is describing here is saying that the one who does not act, the one who does not act faithfully, what is he doing wrong? His responsibility was to help, serve, and provide for other people, fellow servants. But what does he do? He takes the food he was supposed to give them and he eats it. My gosh, he takes from what was supposed to help, and then he oppresses these people. He uses his authority in this exploitive way, thinking that he's what? Superior, when he's supposed to be a servant of the master. He's taken on the entirely wrong identity. He will be punished. But it gets even more shocking. Then Jesus goes on to describe, we won't go to the text, he says, if you are faithful, guess what you're going to find? The master will come, and what's he going to do? He's going to gird himself up like a servant and serve you. That's what it says. That the master himself will gird himself up and will serve the servant. The whole thing seems crazy. It's as if in heaven and in the kingdom, all the social status changes. It's all gone. All the things that we define as to whom is superior and whom's inferior, as to whom should serve each other, in eternity, it's all gone. And so Jesus is saying in eternity, just as it's always been in heaven, the master will serve the servant, just as Jesus served the Father and served us. And that we should begin to live in the way it's going to be, when things will not be defined by the social status here. So begin to serve other people, irregardless of social strata. That is what Jesus is pointing to. If you want to practice the kingdom, stop thinking in terms of how this world evaluates people, in terms of who's superior and who's inferior. Stop. And this is not something Jesus just said here. Actually, this is what he's been saying over and over. If you're joining the kingdom, do not be like the religious leaders who lord things over others. Do not be like these people who think they are superior. What did he do to his own disciples that shocked them? At the end, he came and he washed their feet. He girded up his loins, it said, and he washed their feet. And then he said, go do likewise. This is what he's been bringing home the whole time. You want to practice the kingdom? You want to be one who enters into its reality? Begin to serve people. First of all, begin to see people as equal in their value. When you begin to do that, and then you begin to relate to them as equal in their value, you will actually have started to enter into the reality of the way things will be forever and ever. That is what he's pointing out. And it's radical, no doubt about it, but it's beautiful. It's the way that we would deem and hope things could actually be, that there are not people who are better or worse, or that all of this, and we might think, this is amazing. But this is what Jesus is bringing home to us. He's saying that this is the reality, the way things are going to be forever and ever and ever. And it's starting to break in now. So he's making a suggestion. If that is how your whole life and existence is headed, he's saying just like one who's traveling to somewhere, let's just say that you are going to move tomorrow, and I mean like you're moving for good. Your whole life's moving. What would you do? You'd probably start doing what? Getting tuned into the time zone of that culture. Tuned into the culture, the cultural styles of that culture. You'd start going, what are their customs? What's their time zone? You start getting prepared for the place that you're headed. And Jesus is saying, are you rooted and ready for what is to come? Now, I know many of us think, okay, but before we close on this thing, I feel like he's saying I'm going to be punished for not being a good enough servant. Like this whole thing is like a test, and I'm not sure I'm going to be perfect. I'm not sure I'm going to do it well enough. And does that mean I'm going to be cut into pieces and cast into a place for sinners? Is that what's happening? I think his intent was not to dangle that punishment over us. Because I think what we understand in the end is that he fulfilled being the perfect servant, and only he fulfilled it. What he's asking from us is to be faithful in following him. Because here we're told in this story that the master became a servant and served us. That is the first coming of Jesus. Jesus is saying, I fulfilled being that servant. And as far as the punishment, the punishment if you're not good enough, which is pretty much everyone, by the way, it is everyone. The punishment is to be cut into pieces and deemed and sent to the place of unbelievers. That should sound familiar, because we're told that's exactly what was said upon Jesus. All the very words of Isaiah, all the iniquities would be put on him. He would be crucified, cut into pieces. And he would be what? Cast into the place of sinners. He's the one after his death. It says that he somehow in the mystery of things was brought down into hell before he rose. Do you see that he is the one who's taken all of this upon himself? In his coming, he is the one who's taken the punishment we deserve, so that we can, as it says at the beginning, receive the gift of the kingdom. What Jesus is now saying to us is, I will provide for you. I'll bear the punishment. I am the master servant who fulfills this all. But you're going to have to make a decision. Where do you want to live? Here or there? Jesus made that decision. He chose to live in relationship to the Father. Even though on earth that meant suffering. But he knew what was to come for the joy set before him. And he's saying to you and I, will you make that decision? Will you root yourself and be ready for what is ultimately to come? And that's the question he has for us. He wants us to live more and more deeply rooted, deeply ready. Not defined by merely, oh, well, I really live here, but one day there's something else that'll come. No. I live there, and meanwhile, I'm going to go through the hardships of living in the now, even while I also ultimately live in the then. That's what he wants for us. Let's pray. And I just want to invite us to be honest with God about how perhaps we find ourselves so settled and defined by the way this world is. And just hear in your own heart that Jesus is saying, this is not the way things are. This is a world separated. Everything you experience in your identity and in the way this world functions, this isn't the place to make home. Maybe just in your own heart, just be honest with how maybe you need to be honest with these things and invite him to loosen your settledness in this world. Jesus, we look to you and see one who on one hand you bore so much in this world, but you were filled with a joy that was leading you. And in your resurrection we see that you are the one who has made it possible for us to now live into the future. For you took the punishment. You took what we deserved, all the separation on the cross. And then you said, follow you into the life that you found in your resurrection. We pray that you would help us to set our minds now on the things above, the things that exist in eternity, the way things are. Help us to be freer and more invested in what is to come with our resources. Help us to see other people the way heaven sees them, not defined by all the social statuses of this earth. Lead us, Jesus, we pray. In your name, amen. I want to invite us, let's